Hello, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Natural Areas Conference, a one-day virtual event. I'm Lisa Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Natural Areas Association, and I'm being joined today by my colleagues, Amy Wills, Operations and Membership Manager, and Maura McGinty-Kloss, Programs and Communications Manager of the Natural Areas Association. Amy and Maura will be managing today's technology and be monitoring chat. So if you have any questions or you need any assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to them in chat or email them at info@naturalareas.org. They'll be happy to help you out. Okay, NAA has convened the Natural Areas Conference for over 48 years, and because we know that advancements in knowledge, methodologies, and collaboration happen when researchers and practitioners come together, we felt it's important to continue this important convening. In a perfect world, the 2021 Natural Areas Conference would be an in-person convening. However, as we all know, face-to-face gatherings are a bit of a challenge when it comes to keeping one another safe these days. That, in addition to travel bans continuing for many folks in our industry, particularly those who work for state and federal agencies, have all created factors that have forced us to decide to host a virtual one-day event this year. And so we're just glad that you can be with us for this great event. One of the many positive things that we've learned over the past 1.5 years is that online programming is a vital tool that exponentially expands both access and information sharing. And while we are committed to convening in-person events in the future, we will also continue to offer virtual programming because we strongly believe that good science and collaboration must be available to everyone and not just those who have the time, ability, and means to travel to an in-person event. For those of you who are new to the Natural Areas Association, I'd like to take a few moments to tell you a little bit about us. NAA serves those dedicated to the management and restoration of biologically important natural areas across North America. We believe that protecting nature requires reliable science to inform practice on the ground and a network of stewards who work tirelessly to protect, manage, and restore these important lands and waters. NAA is an engaged community of peers and colleagues who become a resource to each other by responding to questions, proposing ideas, sharing methodologies, and advancing best practices. We distribute quality science virtually, in person, and digitally through diverse programming, including the annual Natural Areas Conference, our Natural Areas Journal, which is a peer-reviewed quarterly publication, our Stewardship and Action field workshops, the State Natural Areas Program roundtables, and our monthly webinars. All of this, as well as other special events that we host throughout the year. NAA and our partners in Minnesota and the surrounding region are already busy planning the 49th convening of the Natural Areas Conference to be held in Duluth, Minnesota, September 6th through the 8th of 2022. This conference is immediately following Labor Day weekend. So we hope that you'll mark your calendar and plan to join us for our first in-person Natural Areas Conference since 2019. The call for proposals is open, and if you're interested in presenting, please submit a proposal before the deadline, which is March 1st of next year. That said, the sooner we get your proposals, the better, and we hope to see you in Duluth. Each year, NAA recognizes a person or an organization that has made an exceptional contribution to the conservation of natural areas. This is our opportunity to celebrate those who have significantly advocated for and advanced research methods or policy approaches for better identification, protection, and management of natural areas. To that end, we present 2 awards to shine light on those worthy of recognition. We typically present these awards at the Natural Areas Conference and at our awards dinner, and due to COVID, we were not able to do that in 2020. We didn't want another year to go by without offering important recognition where it is so richly deserved. And as such, we're going to announce the 2021 award recipients for the Carl N. Becker and the George B. Fell Awards today. And while we will invite each recipient to say a few words, The full celebration of their achievements and the presentation of the physical awards will take place during the annual awards dinner to be held in Duluth during the 2022 conference. So let's begin. The Carl N. Becker Stewardship Award recognizes excellence and achievement in managing reserves, parks, wilderness, and other protected areas. It's given in memory of Carl N. Becker, former Natural Areas Association president and a conservation leader with the Illinois Endangered Species Protection Board, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and the Illinois chapter of the Nature Conservancy. Carl brought leadership skills to all phases of his conservation career. He was an excellent field biologist, bureaucrat, and political thinker. Carl was also a leader. He inspired his staff to work as a team, accomplishing more together than they could as individuals. His skills benefited natural areas conservation locally, regionally, and nationally. In keeping with Carl's legacy, I am delighted to announce the 2021 recipient of the Carl N. Becker Award is Ken McCarty. Ken has directed natural area stewardship for the state park system within the Missouri Department of Natural Resources for 3.5 decades and has been instrumental in the restoration, preservation, and management of many of the 91 parks and historical sites throughout the state. Since we did not have time to go over all of Ken's accomplishments in detail today, the best way to capture Ken's career is through the words of the person who nominated him, Christopher Crabtree of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And I quote, "Ken has been one of the main driving forces of ecological management and stewardship within Missouri's state park system. He has initiated or played major roles in large-scale restoration efforts across Missouri, from upland prairie restorations to bottomland and wet prairie reconstructions, from savanna and open woodland thinning projects to the reclaiming of glades overrun with cedars, from reshaping altered hydrology of damaged riverine systems to working to restore flood pulses and water retention within 400-year-old cypress swamps and bottomland hardwood forests. Ken has done it all." Ken, on behalf of everyone at the Natural Areas Association and all of your colleagues throughout the profession, congratulations. Go ahead and turn your video on, Ken, and feel free to say a few things to the audience.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank to Rick Myers and the awards committee, and thanks to Chris Crabtree and those people who collaborated to place me here this morning. This is quite an honor. It's quite an humbling situation for those of us who've been in it, for those of you who have been in it before. And it's coming from the very people who are doing so much of the work and accomplishing so many of the things that I have always valued and I've always sought in my own ways and places here in Missouri. You know, the core of the natural areas effort to me has always been that of understanding natural systems and natural processes, and then applying that knowledge towards natural area restoration and care at meaningful scales. I've been very fortunate to spend a long career in a state with abundant public lands and natural resources, with an amazing constellation of natural resource professionals, organizations, constituents, and enthused, passionate people. And to be working for the Missouri State Parks with their mission that includes and passion provided to preserve Missouri's outstanding natural landscapes. These have been the portals, and these have been the thresholds, and these have been the means by which we have collectively been able to accomplish so much. We're all benefited by the synergy of this profession of individuals who achieve so much and in so many ways and in so many places. And we're equally for the Natural Areas Association that supports the effort and brings focus to those efforts. So with thanks to the Natural Areas Association and to each of you who are here today for all that you do, for all that you accomplish, and for all that you will continue to do, thank you very much. I'm very honored to achieve this award and accept it with thanks.
Thank you, Ken. We look forward to seeing you in Duluth, where you will be able to celebrate your achievements with family, colleagues, and friends. The George B. Fell Award is NAA's highest honor. It is given in memory of George Fell, a founding Natural Areas Association member and officer and founder of the Natural Land Institute. George dedicated his life to the protection of natural areas, and this award recognizes individuals whose exceptional accomplishments in the natural areas profession have advanced knowledge in the identification, protection, and management of natural areas. The 2021 recipient of the George B. Fell Award is an originator of new concepts and conservation approaches. It's not an overstatement to say that his impact has been widely felt across the country as well as around the world. He has been a lifelong advocate, researcher, and facilitator of natural areas management and conservation, and a pioneer in the field of forest ecology. His exceptional career in research and advocacy advancing natural areas conservation has spanned 50 years, and his efforts have had far-reaching positive impacts on the protection and stewardship of natural areas. He's been an inspiration to his many students, colleagues, and collaborators. He has accomplished an astounding amount of consequential work over his long career. And for this, we are all indebted to him, and the natural world is better and better protected thanks to his efforts. It is my very special honor and privilege to announce that the Natural Areas Association recipient of the 2021 George B. Fell Award is an NAA lifetime member, Dr. Glenn Jude. Glenn, my friend and colleague, thank you and congratulations. So go ahead and turn your video on and take a few moments to share your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I just wish I could adequately convey to this audience and all the members of NAA, the nominators, the award committee, my gratitude for selecting me for this award. Every person who receives the award is being recognized for what he or she has done together with so many others. In a way, each time the award's given, it's just a spotlight on a time, a place, a group of people. In my case, my wife has been one of the biggest contributors to the causes cited in the award. She kept me grounded as a person able to relate to other human beings rather than off in a cloud. She more than put up with my work. She supported me and gave me the strength to do the things that I'm sure that all of you are familiar with. A lifetime of, late night work, long field trips, schedules dictated by nature. I knew George Fell. George was the most dedicated, stubborn, modest, insistent, committed, and very occasionally infuriating worker in conservation that I and most other people have ever met. John Humke is quoted in the biography of George as saying that he was not the easiest person to have a relationship with, but he had so much commitment that when you hung around him, some of it always rubbed off on you. And you really didn't have any choice in the matter. You just came away a better person. In 1987, I related to George that I had just not succeeded in building the financial support for my soft money position as Alaska Ecological Reserves Coordinator. And I was thinking about doing one last big effort to move everything forward and then find a new niche. But he was just such an inspiration because of his repeated example of identifying what was needed for natural areas and just doing it. So in my case, I didn't know if my plan would work or not, or where I would end up. But George, I realized, had just done that repeatedly. So I decided, why not? I got approval from my university for a sabbatical. I traveled through 23 states, 4 Canadian provinces. I visited with natural area program people in most of them. And I ended up in the Office of the Vice President for Science Programs of the Nature Conservancy, which was headed by Bob Jenkins, another winner of the George Fell Award. Well, just before I left, my dean offered me a regular and funded faculty position. So I remained here at the university. But that experience, being with the people all across the continent, doing the difficult, often frustrating, painstaking, and very rewarding work of natural areas protection and management, taught me just so much. In addition to all the things we think of, keeping the scorecards of the acres saved, bringing good science to our efforts, finding and tracking the most endangered elements of natural diversity, building modern data systems, building new NGOs, I came to realize what truly matters is that we are all doing these things together and what we are doing for each other. That's critical. So we who are dedicated to protecting natural areas with our professional skills all know, in a way most people don't, exactly how important our work is for the survival of nature. In all my time with people who spend their lives saving and maintaining nature, I came to see how important the Natural Areas Association truly is. There are just so many forces stacked against us, but I've learned that what we have in abundance, as George exhibited so well, is our unshakable commitment. Given the number of species and ecosystems that survive today and would not have if George had not done the things that he did, as outrageous as it sounds, that was a man who recognizably bent the course of evolution. But the remarkable thing is that every one of you also deserve to be recognized for your part, however large or small, in that same great accomplishment and continuing challenge. So in accepting this award, my request to all of you is this: keep supporting each other. Take renewed pride and satisfaction in what you are doing, and don't ever, ever stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. The honor is well deserved, and I know your NAA family looks forward to celebrating with you in Duluth. The Natural Areas Conference is about building community, and in that spirit, NAA is thrilled to welcome well over 600 registrants today who will experience this content both live and on demand following the event. Life from the Ashes, exploring the impact of prescribed and natural fire on insects and other invertebrates, will explore the positive and negative impacts of prescribed and natural fire on insects and other invertebrates in landscapes across North America. Today's presentations will provide research and practical insights to inform natural areas professionals as they manage landscapes with fire. As professionals continue to advance and refine prescribed fire practices and continue to grapple with the outcomes of wildfires, it's important to include a consideration of the invertebrate populations and habitats within these affected sites. This has been raised as a concern within our community for a number of years now. Our goal today is to take a closer look at this topic and consider some of the practical implications of fire to invertebrates and how we can include them in our management plans. At this point, I'd like to recognize our sponsors whose contributions made this programming possible. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation as our key partner in the development of this program. Xerces is the leading organization providing invaluable science in connection to invertebrate and pollinator awareness, education, and conservation. Under the leadership of Executive Director Scott Hoffman Black, Xerces has contributed generously to this event through their time and effort. We're especially grateful to Scott for his leadership, helping NAA to develop a relevant, timely, and practical agenda. Today's presenters are geographically diverse and are respected thought leaders in this field. This conference would not be possible without their contribution of time and talent, so I want to offer my sincere thanks for their participation on behalf of the organization. In addition, we are sincerely appreciative of underwriting from our partners at the U.S. Forest Service who helped to make this event affordable for all of you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Scott Black. Scott is an internationally recognized conservationist who has been at the forefront of the conservation movement for 3 decades. He is the executive director of the Xerces Society, which under his leadership has become the premier invertebrate conservation organization in North America. Scott's work has led to protection and restoration of habitat on millions of acres of rangelands, forests, and farmland, as well as protection for many endangered species. He's authored the best-selling Attracting Native Plant Pollinators and Gardening for Butterflies, and has written more than 200 other publications, including a recent chapter on climate change and insects. Scott's work has been honored with several awards, including the 2011 Colorado State University College of Agricultural Sciences Honor Alumnus Award, the U.S. Forest Service's Wings Across America's 2012 Butterfly Conservation Award, the 2019 Wings Across the Americas International Research Partnership Award, and a 2020 Nature's Choice Award from the Greater Good Foundation. We here at NAA have had great pleasure to partner with Scott and his staff at Xerces for a number of years now on this very type of programming. It's a fine example, I think, of how partners can work together to get important information into the hands of managers of nature. Scott, thank you for all that you have contributed to this event, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. That was very kind of you. And I want to say congratulations to Ken and Glenn. It just seems so well received, those awards. So thanks for your great contribution to conservation, both of you. I'm going to kick off today, give some thoughts on the symposium and the idea of life from the ashes, exploring the impact of prescribed and natural fire on insects and other invertebrates. And I'm just going to try to provide some context for these deeper talks and deeper discussions that we can have later today. I'm fortunate to get to talk to audiences actually all around the world and have done that for decades. And I have to do my thank yous first, so I don't rush them at the end, to make sure all of those people that help me do what I do are recognized. And I guess similar to Glenn, and he talked about his wife, I need to talk about my entire family. I do this work, and I'm empowered to do this work by my family. I'm inspired by my family, and they put up with me doing this work too. So I really could not do my job without my lovely kids and my lovely wife. Xerces is a partnership organization. We really cannot, I believe, as a community, meet the challenges of conservation without really good, sincere partnerships. And so there's a lot of people to thank. First and foremost, I do want to also thank the Natural Areas Association, great organization who really is partnership oriented. And especially I want to thank Maura, Lisa, and Amy, because this conference would not be put together without them. Want to thank all of the speakers of the symposium. Xerces is a science-based organization. We work with scientists around the world. Thank you to them. Thank you to all the agencies we work with. Thanks to all the farmers and land managers we work with, the companies, the private foundation, and the tens of thousands of community scientists and everyday people that work on invertebrates. And a special shout out to our Xerces members. I will say, if you're already a member of the Natural Areas Association, that's great. If you aren't, become a member, and then consider becoming a member of Xerces as well. This is how our organizations function, is through your generous donations. I also want to give a sincere thank you to Xerces staff. We'll be hitting 71 staff coming up, people working across the country, people incredibly committed to conservation who are out there every day, making the world a better place. And so I really couldn't do these talks without them. So for those of you who don't know what the Xerces Society is, we're named after the first butterfly to go extinct due to humans, the Xerces blue butterfly. Back in the 1940s, as San Francisco expanded, buildings and houses were built on the last habitat of the Xerces blue. And in 1971, Robert Michael Pyle felt that there needed to be an organization that focused on butterflies and other small animals that help run the food chain. And so he named the Xerces Society the Xerces Society because he felt it had meaning, and it really does. And Xerces is really holistic in how we work. First, we are science-based, and we work with academic scientists, public agencies, private landowners to understand the animals and the areas we want to conserve and protect. Because really feel you can't do this work without really understanding the systems and the species that are your core focus. We also, luckily, are able to harness an incredible amount of data from a community science community through our Bumblebee Watch, our Western Monarch and Milkweed Mapper, and our other efforts. We're able to get really usable, actionable data to help us in our conservation decision making. So I want to thank all of them. We use this science in all of our outreach and education. We've reached over 150,000 people around the globe. Is in my tenure at Xerces, giving them information that they can use for conservation. And that is really key. Thinking about your audience and giving them the information they can use. Xerces also, though, works on policy and advocacy. I have felt ever since I wanted to be a scientist that I needed to be able to speak my mind, and I believe that scientists should be in the room when important decisions are made and should be there advocating for the science that's going to help us through climate change and the loss of biodiversity. And last but not least, our core efforts are really around species conservation and habitat conservation. And we've been able to protect and restore over 2.5 million acres for a variety of invertebrates and improve management on tens of millions of additional acres. So today I want to talk about fire. I'm a big believer in prescribed fire and its use in the landscapes. But I want to talk about how not all invertebrate groups respond the same way to fire, and that we really do need a thoughtful approach to prescribed fire that maximizes both the benefits to the vegetation response as well as to biodiversity. And why are we here? That's what I want to talk about first. We're doing a whole symposium on invertebrates, which is something. When I started at Xerces 20 years ago, this would have been a gleam in my eye, but we're talking about them all day now. And we're talking about them because they're really, really important. And they're really important because insects and their allies represent the vast majority of described animal species on the planet. You can see in this picture the big beetle here that denotes the number of species relative to the other groups. And if you look at beetles, you look at crustaceans, you look at mollusks and the other invertebrate groups, you can see that they're incredibly diverse. There's actually around 1.4 million cataloged invertebrate species on the planet. 1.4 million, that's a lot. And what's even more astounding is what we likely don't know. A very conservative estimate is that there is around 7 million invertebrate species that we have not yet cataloged. And what this means is that these animals, because they're so diverse, occupy a great number of niches in all environments. So they're helping underlay and drive these systems. And there aren't just the most diverse animals on the planet, they're also often the heavyweights of the animal world. This is just a study from Costa Rica showing that 90% of terrestrial animal biomass in the forest that they studied were invertebrates, 90% of animal biomass. And it's not just in rainforests. This was, I thought, a really interesting paper, the biomass distribution on Earth. And as you can see from the left square, plants really are the most, have the most biomass on the planet by far. Plants are incredibly important for the functioning of this planet. But if you go down and look at the animal portion of total biomass, you can see once we get to animals, especially in terrestrial situations, that arthropods, mollusks, annelids, these invertebrates are really the heavyweights of the planet. So I like to say that the plants and the insects together are really the fabric of the planet. And when we're thinking about management, we should really be thinking about them both. I also don't want to ever insinuate that I don't care about the larger animals and the other taxa. I do. They're really important. But we also need to think about the insects and other invertebrates. And we need to do that because they are everywhere and they are driving systems. One example, 96% songbirds rear their young on invertebrates. 96%. If you like birds, you should think about managing for insects. The same with fish. Macroinvertebrates are vital for most fish species. And midges in the streams are one of the most important food sources for juvenile salmon. So birds, fish, even large mammals. I don't think when most of you are thinking about brown bears, grizzly bears, that you're thinking that they really rely on insects, but they eat salmon. It's one of their main food sources. Those salmon rely on insects when they're young in the stream. And their other main food source are berries, which rely on insects for pollination. So really moving up the food chain, insects are vitally important. They also help us decompose our waste. We'd be up to our necks in waste without invertebrate groups. They pollinate 85% of flowering plants, are pollinated by animals, and it's mostly insects that are moving this pollen. And this paper by Losi and Bond in 2006 found that a very conservative estimate was very conservative estimate was $57 billion a year that they're providing to the US economy. That would be $70 billion a year in today's economy. But invertebrates are in decline, just as all wildlife are across the planet. And an increasing number of studies are showing declines worldwide. And a very good paper that you might want to check out, or a very good issue, actually, of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, stated in their introduction, while there's much variation across time, space, and taxonomic lineages, reported rates of annual decline in abundance frequently fall around 1 to 2%. 1 to 2% a year. We're seeing declines at that scale. Those are large scale declines. And, you know, I love animals and all species are worth protecting, but we're really hitting the place where we're risking losing ecological functions. So why are invertebrates declining? Well, it is, as Dave Wagner, who wrote that introduction to the PNAS issue, said, a death by 1,000 cuts. You know, it's the climate crisis, it's pesticides, it's invasive species, it's many, many other issues. But I want to focus for a second today on one issue that I think when we're thinking about fire and prescribed fire that we need to think about almost most, and that is habitat loss and degradation. Likely two of the main factors in decline of many wildlife species, including our invertebrates. And so we lose a lot of habitat to large-scale agriculture or to shopping malls and bluegrass lawns. But we also then see over the fence degradation. We might see total loss of habitat and then right across the fence, too much mowing or conifer encroachment or invasive plants, or in some cases, too much prescribed fire. And we need to think about habitat loss and degradation. And we need to think about them because historically these animals, including invertebrates, had much larger and more connected habitats. And they're often now relegated to very small patches of former habitat. This is just an image from an upcoming paper in prep from Forrester et al. He's at the University of Nevada, Reno, where we're looking at how we connect animals to move across the Central Valley of California. And you can see the current situation in the middle. There are just many, many large gaps where there really are not large habitat areas. And we need to think about connectivity, but we also need to think about fire and this issue that these animals are living often in small postage stamp habitats, and there is little connectivity. So first and foremost, why do we need fire? As I said, I'm a strong proponent of fire. Both controlled and natural fire are vital for maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem health. And in many places, there's so many issues why we need fire, but in many places, conifers and other trees and shrubs, as well as invasive plant species, have changed the character of many of our natural areas. This is from the Rogue River National Forest, and a site that I'll talk about more, but this is the meadow complex in 1953. This is the meadow complex in 2011. You can see that the dynamics and the ability to move across these landscapes have changed a lot. Natural fire has shaped ecosystems for millennia, and indigenous people also set fires to improve their landscapes for foraging and hunting. And unfortunately, though, our quote unquote natural fires are getting larger and hotter, and the fire season is longer than it used to be due to a combination of the climate crisis and long-term fire suppression and other management issues. But the good thing about prescribed fire is that it's not only an important wildlife habitat tool, but it can also help us manage vegetation and fuels to create resilient landscapes that can better cope with wildfires. As I say, we're going to have fire whether we manage it or not. We're seeing more and hotter fires, and if we can use prescribed fire to help manage these fires, we have a real win-win there. But there are some prescribed burn considerations that we really do need to think about, and I'm going to mostly focus on prescribed burning, although we have a couple of great talks on natural fire today. The first consideration is, remember that invertebrates are incredibly diverse. There are more than 1.4 million described invertebrates on the planet. And although the symposium is called Invertebrates and Fire, we need to think maybe beyond that, because boy, that's a large number of animals to think about all at once. So we need to think about potential groups and how they're impacted, and sometimes really rare species like the Sacramento Mountain checker spot that only lives in a few places in New Mexico. We need to think beyond just these buckets of large groups. We need to think about life history. There are lots of variable life histories of these animals, and we can come up with some generalizations. Prescribed burns in general, there's less declines been recorded in species that are below ground or beneath unburned woods, or are in treetops. Like this is Johnson hairstreak. It's one of the few old forest-dependent butterflies. Its host plant is conifer mistletoe. And if you did a prescribed fire in the understory, it probably would have little impact on this species. Mobility is really important. Can these animals get out of the way of fire? And can they, just as important, recolonize after fire? Really, really important. And I want to point out a study. Lisa mentioned the Natural Areas Journal. This is a study from the Natural Areas Journal from 2000, where they looked at arthropod richness and abundance in Illinois prairies and found that spring burns strongly depressed arthropod abundance initially, but that abundance of species richness tended to recover toward the end of summer. They attributed this mostly due to recolonization from adjacent unburned areas. But nevertheless, certain groups were affected more than others by fire. Springtails, aphids, plant hoppers, parasitoid wasps, spiders were really significantly reduced by fire. So we need to think about just beyond invertebrates and think about how this will affect the entire community. And the authors really suggest that to preserve native arthropod faunas, that land managers should ensure unburned refuges are maintained, and that we allow intervals between burns for recolonization. So number one, we need to better understand these systems. And I know it's difficult to understand everything about the invertebrates in your system. And I'll talk a little bit about how we might get that information. But we do need to understand what animals are on these areas that we want to burn. And we need to think about frequency. How often do you burn to maximize the benefits of vegetation, at the same time minimizing the impacts to the animal species that are living on site? Really important consideration. We need to think about timing. When is the best time of year to burn so that you will limit impact to most species? This is a figure from a paper that Xerces put out that shows the management windows for monarch butterflies. But monarch butterflies are really pretty easy to figure out timing for because they're migratory and they leave these areas. So you can manage without them there. Most animals are resident on site, and we don't have the information for when you manage most animals. Just so you know, MJB, the Monarch Joint Venture, another great partner of ours, has a similar graphic for best management windows for monarchs in the eastern United States. We also need to think about severity. There's little information comparing invertebrate responses to severity, but it is presumed that that low intensity burns would be best. Again, we got to manage the good vegetation response with minimizing impact to these resident species. And then one of the most important things, I think, is scale. Burning in a large connected national forest is quite different than burning in a small remnant native prairie in Iowa. Just is. And many studies show that we need to leave unburned refuges. This is a figure of a species I work on called Polites marden, the marden skipper. And this is the extent of its population at this site. If we burn this half, 3/4 donut here, and the entire thing gets burned, we could extirpate this species, or at least major set this species back. So we need to think about scale in proportion to our burned areas. Now, quick case study on butterflies. We talked about 1.4 million invertebrates. You think butterflies might be manageable. Well, there are 18,000 species of butterflies worldwide, 800 in North America, and they have different needs, different host plants, overwintering and diapause strategies. So we can't quite think of them all together, but we can make some generalizations. Many butterflies respond favorably to fire. And by the way, I'm not going to do a deep dive into fire. Ray Morans will be talking at the end of the day much more about butterflies. But most butterflies need early sterile habitat, and fire can be a very important tool for them. This is the Fender's blue butterfly, and thoughtful prescribed fire has helped this butterfly to recover. But not all butterflies do as well with fire. This is the marden skipper, a butterfly I've worked a lot on. It lives in the Pacific Northwest of the US with these interesting disjunct populations in Washington, in Oregon, and in Northern California. And marden skippers are part of the grass feeding family. They feed on grasses, and they're in meadows within forests. And studies by the Washington State University show that marden overwinters as is larvae at the base of host plants. And so it's likely really susceptible to fire. Yet we're seeing massive encroachment. This is that image I showed you again, 1953, 2011. Martin skipper's habitats are shrinking, so we need to think about how to manage for these butterflies. And similarly, research at Washington State University has showed that martin avoid shade. So it's not just where these conifers are, it's the shade as they grow that they're putting off. These butterflies actually don't, they avoid that shade. So we needed to understand, how do these butterflies respond to different management? And so I worked with the Six Rivers National Forest and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a controlled burn study. And it was really serendipitous because the Forest Service had developed a burn study. And over the summer, after they developed that, I and a colleague found martin at the site where they were going to burn. And I have to say, they were very great to work with because they'd already had the burn study. But we modified that burn study so that we could burn half of the areas of where martin used and not burn half of the other areas. And we marked these areas, where to burn, where not to burn. And then we did transects through the burned and unburned areas for 4 out of the next 5 years. And what we found was that in the first year, definitely there were impact to martin skipper populations. This is just kind of a snapshot of part of the study area. And you can see the red are the burned areas and the green are the unburned areas. And these are numbers in the zones based on our transects in these zones. And you can see that there are a lot fewer martin skippers in the burned areas than in the unburned areas. We did this, as I said, over 5 years for sampling, multiple sampling events over 5 years. And what we found is that those burned areas really did not recover very rapidly. By 2013, you can see in that bar here that martin still really hadn't recovered to the level of the unburned areas. Now, this is just one study. I think there's more information that we can glean, but from this study, we had concerns of using prescribed fire in these meadows. And we've been working in a lot of these meadows with the Forest Service and BLM to mechanically remove small trees as we try to understand more and better and have a light touch with fire in these meadows. Terrestrial mollusks are also a group that we know are impacted a lot by fire. Unlike butterflies, which generally respond favorably, the data suggests that there are pretty significant impacts to our mollusk species through fire. And snails and slugs are really essential components of forest ecosystems. They compose forest litter, recycle nutrients, build soils, provide food for countless animals. So we really need to think about these animals. And by the way, they're incredibly cool. I love this picture. This is Malone's jumping slug. Looks like it's just getting ready to give you a kiss. And it's a jumping slug. This is a slug that evolved with a large predatory snail that hunts it by finding its slime trail. And that predatory snail is really fast, so it follows the slime trail and catches up and engulfs other snails and slugs. Well, when it gets up to a Malone's jumping slug, this slug separates itself from terra firma and corkscrews away. It basically jumps away, and that snail predator is basically blind and loses its track. I just find these animals, beyond being important, just really, really cool. So yes, I'm geeking out a little bit here for you. So fire has a potential to negatively influence these animals in several ways, both directly of course, fire-related mortality, but probably more consequentially by altering habitat, by reducing and eliminating resources, both resources that these animals need to eat and resources that they need to live. And snails and slugs live for the most part on vegetation and litter. They have they don't move very fast or very far often, and are sensitive to desiccation. So they're really highly vulnerable to fire, to the fire itself, as well as the habitat issues. By the way, I'll post some links later. Most of this on snails and slugs is from one paper that I did with my colleague, Sarah Fultz Jordan, on the effects of forest management on terrestrial mollusks, a literature review. But a lot of the literature we brought into this is not just forests. It's literature on managing snails and slugs across landscapes. But the studies out there are really do show that fire can have pretty severe consequences. A 5-year study in Yellowstone after the Yellowstone fires in Aspen found that there were pretty severe ramifications. And at one severely burned site, they did not record any live snails after 5 years. And there have been several studies that show that fire really does reduce species richness and density. This study in 2011 found that there was significantly lower abundance of individual snails and 50% lower species richness than undisturbed forests. And once extirpated from a site, populations of these gastropods can be really slow to recover. The study by Burke, looking at the research, found that sometimes they're reported after 50 years, some sites reported few snails and much lower species richness. And even larger snails can take years to repopulate a bird habitat. Now, not all studies are universally bad when it comes to fire and snails, but most of the studies that seem to show more limited impact seem to suggest that it's because they're recolonizing from adjacent areas that are unburned. And this, I think, lends us to why we need to be cautious about burning an entire habitat. I do want to point out one thing from natural fire. We need to be really thoughtful about post-disturbance logging, because that's a 1-2 punch. We can see a fire come through, really harm snails and slugs, and then post-disturbance logging can even harm them more. So just to wrap up, here's a few thoughts on some best management practices, some rules of thumb. First, try to understand what's in your habitats. Work with universities, work with volunteers, work with community scientists. You know, if you're interested in bumblebees, check out our Bumblebee Watch. We also have what are called bumblebee atlases in 9 states. We're getting really good comprehensive information across these states. Check out our Bumblebee Watch site and Google Bumblebee Atlas to find out more. Leave at least 1/3 of an area unburned at each burning event, and consider leaving long-term no-burn refuges. This is really most important for small areas that are surrounded by development, or for species like terrestrial mollusks. But it is really, really important that we're not burning entire sites, especially if these sites are surrounded by inhospitable areas. And then think about fire return, probably a maximum of 3 to 5 years, but maybe more for certain species like mollusks. There's clear evidence that burning too often has is really negative for some invertebrate groups. And then think about when you're going to burn. Most of these animals live on site year round. You may not see them, but they are there. So generally the dormant season is probably best, you know, October to February, maybe into March in certain places. But we don't have all of the information. I talked to somebody who does a lot of prescribed burning, has in California and now in the Pacific Northwest the other day, and he's thinking maybe you know, burns later in the winter and in the spring burn off less of the duff layer. So for mollusks, maybe if there is the ability to burn later in the season and into the spring, that might be beneficial for these animals. But we should still leave unburned areas wherever possible. And if a fire skips an area, you don't need to go back and burn it. Just leave it. It could be a micro habitat for recolonization. And then if possible, and I know resources are always slim, monitor for species that might be impacted by fire. If you can understand your system, you can make changes. You can adaptively change how you do fire moving forward. So with that, I just want to say I'm really, oh, I had one more slide and I added that and want to definitely address this. I was really hoping to have someone talk about using traditional knowledge at the symposium, and unfortunately we weren't able to find someone. But these indigenous communities have been using fire for millennia. And many native tribes have extensive knowledge in how to manage ecosystems with fire. So I think it's incumbent on us as land managers to figure out where and when we can partner with tribal members on prescribed efforts where possible, and to learn from them and to work with them on these important issues, because the fire is affecting all of us, whether it is you know, large fires caused by climate change or our prescribed fire that might be helping these systems. I think we all need to try to work together. So I'm really excited about the rest of the day, and we've got really great talks that are going to do a deep dive into some of these issues, and then we'll have a closing panel where you can ask questions and hopefully get some answers that might help you manage your natural area. So with that, thank you so much. I so happy you're all here and excited to be here with you today.
Thank you, Scott. That was a most excellent introduction. You laid some great foundation for the rest of the day, and we have quite a few questions for you, and we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you're game, I'll go ahead and all right, I'll work through some of these. Thanks to the audience. Excellent questions, by the way. So the first one was from a participant who would love to hear a little bit about the impact of smoke, or what we might know about the impact of smoke on insects in areas that don't burn but are adjacent to fire zones.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, and one thing I will tell you up front, when I don't know, I will say I don't know. I don't think that we really understand the impact of fire on invertebrate species. It's something that there does not seem to be much literature out there. And, you know, people were thinking that potentially some of the large fires in the West might have impacted migration of monarchs back to California last year. But we just don't have the information to understand how much and if there's really an impact from fire. I'm assuming, as with all animals, that fire changes behavior of animals. We do know that honeybees, which are not native to the United States, we can use fire to help manage honeybee hives. It certainly changes their behavior. So I think that we can be assured that fire is likely changing the behavior of insects. I know that people were noticing that when we had large fires in the West last year, they were seeing fewer bees at flowers. But I don't think we yet have data on that. I would go to any of the other panelists if maybe John or others, Molly, had information that they might want to share that I don't know. Just pop in if you do.
Okay, great. Yes, good point. So I just want to point out that there's tremendous discussion going on between participants in chat as well. So, please continue to do that. In the meantime, a couple of questions, comments about the marten skipper, which is your one of your subjects, Scott. First question, do you have a sense of how long the burn interval would need to be for the marten skipper?
Yes, well, I wish we had been able to continue that study longer, right? If you remember from my slide, the marten skipper did seem to have a pretty big uptick in year 5. It had not reached levels that of the unburned areas. I'm just would hazard a guess that it was on its way to recovering in the burned area in years 6, 7, and 8. But it could be 10 years before that butterfly was fully recovered. I also want to say that is one study, and that I think has some really good information that we can use to make some management decisions. But I really think it would be really helpful to do some more prescribed fire work on the marten to understand the situation even better. One issue I want to point out with that study is that although we saw, I think, pretty large mortality in the burned areas, it was not a very hot fire. It was really wet when they went in. They had a unusual wet snap that fall. And so I don't think the vegetation response was as well with a flush of new grasses, maybe that would have improved the host plant situation for the butterfly and allowed it to recover more quickly. So, any one study has its limitations. That said, we should be pretty cautious. We should at minimum go 5 years with marten skipper, and I would contend probably longer than that. And in marten skipper meadows, which are pretty isolated, I think it would just be ideal to burn half of those meadows, right? Or to burn a third of those meadows, and then not go back for 5 or 7 years.
Okay, great. And you may have, I think you might have addressed a question from another participant with the marten skipper when there was the suggestion there was that there would have been a lot of fuel accumulation and growth of very volatile, hot burning brush and likely higher fire intensity than there would have been had regular burns leading up. If there had been regular burns leading up to the first burn. Wondered if you'd investigated, you had suggested the fire, that burn was not a hot burn, but question was, have you investigated reducing fuel before burning to reduce initial fire intensity?
Yeah, I don't think have been many studies specifically on invertebrates of reducing fuel before fires, but certainly I think in certain systems, because we've had so much conifer encroachment, that's something that definitely should be considered, and would likely be beneficial to species like the marten skipper and some of our mollusks that are out there. So I just don't think there's a lot of data on that. What would be kind of neat now is we have worked with the Forest Service and BLM to remove a lot of the small trees from some of the marten meadows. It would be neat now to do some prescribed fire in those systems now that that fuel has been removed, and see the response.
Okay. Here again, you may have covered this, but question is, are there plans to examine proximal area to Marden locations that have been blown out or directly impacted by recent wildfires versus just prescribed fire effects?
Yeah, I don't think there are any plans to do that. And I don't think that, although it's been an incredible last few fire seasons, I'm not aware of any Marden skipper sites that have had fires in very close proximity to them. But that would be something to look into. We did have a fire that burned part of a site in southern, as you saw, they're disjunct populations. Several years ago, we had fire that burned part of a Marden site in southern Oregon at the coast. But unfortunately, we didn't really have good data before the fire to get data after the fire went through at those sites. As you know, research dollars are very scarce, and so we do what we can with the limited funding that we have, and then we make as good a decisions as we can. And I think that's a real key to natural areas management, is that we always have to make decisions based on that best information, because we're never going to have perfect information. And that's why I appreciate you all so much, because I know you're pretty savvy about how to make really difficult decisions without enough information.
Very true. Can you speak at all to the use of or the effects of prescribed fire on tick populations?
I'm just going to say I don't have any information on tick populations and prescribed fire, and maybe somebody in the chat or somebody else might have that. I do want to go back to my last question, because Kelly Van Norman, who is a great colleague at the Bureau of Land Management that we've worked with, Windy Valley Marden skipper on the Rogue River, Siskiyou National Forest in Southwest Oregon, burned lightly in a wildfire several years ago. We do have distance sample monitoring at the site from before and have continued afterwards. So we should look at that data and see what we can see. And then Danny, who I'm going to not mangle your last name, says a new study on ticks and prescribed fire. Oops, it moved up. I'm going to go back to that. New study on ticks and prescribed fire out in a year or two from Penn State grad students. We should really look forward to that. And then somebody else, yeah, just some of these other questions, but that will be great. And then Dr. GLEIM has done a good amount of research on ticks and prescribed fire, and there's a link in there to that. So some good work on that. And let's hope they respond negatively in some ways to the prescribed fire, not positively in that case. We're normally, of course, want a positive response to invertebrates, but of course, some of these animals that can cause Lyme disease or other issues, that might not be the response that we're hoping for.
Okay, yeah, lots of questions, lots of great responses in chat, lots of links. We're going to capture all of that to make sure the chat log can be provided to everybody as well. Back to a few more questions for you, Scott. This is a big one, and it does come up, in conversation a lot for us. It's just one of these, one of the many things that we grapple with as managers, or our managers grapple with. And it would be good to get your, just your thoughts on it, because I know it's something that you've probably thought about as well. And we're talking about prescribe, we know that wildfire is a problem, but the question is, what are the effects of prescribed burns, or how does prescribed burning play into climate change, and how should we really be thinking about or justifying doing it? And I think you probably have some wisdom to offer there.
Yeah, there are probably so many people that are listening that might have more wisdom. I focus on invertebrate conservation and climate change, and fire is one of the many things that I do focus on. But I guess I don't know if this is wisdom, but we are going to see more and larger fires, whether we like it or not. That's already happening. We're already seeing this, partially driven by climate change, as well as past management, or in some cases not much management of some of these systems. And so I think what I tell people is that prescribed fire, if we can burn in a thoughtful way and minimize the impact of some of these really large kind of conflagrations that we seem to be having, that is a net benefit from a climate change point of view, because we're burning up so much more carbon in some of these really, really hot fires than we are in a good prescribed fire that is burning up smaller brush and smaller trees and leaving the large trees. When we are igniting sequoias and killing sequoias in Sequoia National Park with these large hot fires, that is such a net negative from a climate change and a biodiversity point of view. So, but I bet there's some even a lot better pearls of wisdom from some of these folks who work on fire all the time. So please put them in the chat. There, I think, are so many good reasons to be doing prescribed fire, from climate change, from biodiversity, from managing large fires around communities. I think there are just so many good reasons to do prescribed fires, and very few negatives if we're thoughtful about them.
Thank you for that. Wonderful. Okay, again, we didn't get to all of the questions, Scott. We'll try to tease through them and see if there are any that we can bring back to the discussion later in the day. But again, thanks to panelists who are very much participating in answering one another's questions and providing incredible resources. So we'll make sure all of this gets captured. Scott, thank you so much.